MuchMusic was a huge part of my life growing up, and I know I'm not the only one who feels that way. In the 80s and 90s, the music video channel helped define what was hot in Canada. Today on the podcast, we get into the legacy of 299 Queen Street West. I'm Amil Niazi, sitting in for Elamin Abdelmahmoud. This is Commotion. Take a listen to this.
Are we ready? Are we ready? Let's go. 3, 2, 1, Bunchy, do it, baby. Oh, yeah. Oh, no. Oh, no. Oh, the humanity. Oh. Does anybody have a match? You know what? Almost died.
That's MuchMusic VJ Steve Anthony tossing a Christmas tree off the balcony of the station studio and, as you heard, almost falling over the railing in the process. You know, if you were a kid, if you were around in the 80s and 90s like I was, that's just a taste of some of the crazy hijinks that would greet you anytime you turned on MuchMusic. And when it wasn't full of VJs nearly falling to their death, it served up the hottest videos from artists like Britney Spears and Madonna. And now this iconic part of our Canadian cultural history is the focus of a new documentary from filmmaker Sean Menard. It's named after the station's iconic address in Toronto, 299 Queen Street West. Here to talk about the film, we have Craig F. Halket. He was an on-air personality and program director at MuchMusic for 25 years. And Liisa Ladouceur and Dalton Higgins are both music journalists. Welcome to the group chat, everyone. So excited to talk MuchMusic with all of you. Craig, you were interviewed for this film, but a few weeks back, you actually went on social media and said that you were not going to see the documentary. What was bothering you about this sort of film when you said that?
Well, leading up to the movie, I'd heard from a lot of my colleagues that hadn't been spoken to, and a lot of them were really concerned that they hadn't been part of it. Mm-hmm. And because there were so many people there that were there quite a long time, and because it was such a formative thing in their careers and in their lives and the lives of so many Canadians, I think they felt hurt. And I mean, to me, I kind of felt for them, and I felt for my colleagues that had been excluded. But after thinking about it a little bit, and I did speak to the director and I said, you know what, I think I should see the movie because I've sort of passed some judgment without hearing or seeing it firsthand. So that's why I did see it in Hamilton this past week, and I get it now. Okay.
And your thoughts now that you've seen it?
I think it is a great documentation of what MuchMusic was. It isn't the ultimate MuchMusic movie. I think that would have to be at least 10 parts. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the whole thing. And I think it really captures a lot of the eras, some of the iconic figures, some of the ones that kind of stood out as a little unique and that made MuchMusic stand out. People like Sukyin Lee or Namageddon that really sort of were sort of unique and sort of maybe not your traditional TV hosts at that time.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I think that's a really fair point. Liisa, you were one of the kids who sort of came of age with MuchMusic in the 80s and 90s. What made that era so special to you? What connected you to this channel?
Well, MuchMusic changed my life, full stop. As a music fan in a small town who only really had access to AM pop, I had a lot of Air Supply and Lionel Richie records. And then I turned on the TV one day and there was a new channel on my cable station. I was a teenager and I saw The Cult and New Order and The Cure and my world just blew open. And I said this in a book I wrote about goth. After watching the music video for She Sells Sanctuary by The Cult, it was like a blood transfusion. I may have looked the same on the outside, but I was a completely different person on a genetic level inside after that. And MuchMusic gave me, in a small town, a window on an entire world of music. And I was immediately hooked. My goal in life became, I want to work at MuchMusic.
I honestly feel there's so many of us who had that same experience. We watched it, we connected to something, and people forget now that when you were growing up, back in the day, you had to seek out culture that was different, that wasn't part of the mainstream. It didn't just come to you. Did you feel the film captured some of what you're talking about?
I feel that the film captured how exciting it was to work at MuchMusic. I don't know that it captured the bigger picture of what it did for people like me or artists. You know, the first time I saw Moberg from The Pursuit of Happiness walking down Queen Street, it could have been Bono as far as I was concerned, because Bono, they put Canadian acts television on the same level playing field as these famous people from other countries. And so I feel that the film didn't really capture that part of the excitement of early MuchMusic.
Mm-hmm. I mean, yes, definitely. I also was thinking it introduced me to so much Canadian music. And Dalton, it also, in this film, really showed how much MuchMusic promoted Black music, particularly rap, at a time when it just wasn't on commercial radio. Can you give us a sense of how important MuchMusic kind of was to that evolution of hip-hop and R&B here in Canada?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, here's the funny thing, anybody that watches the film, and you're going to get all of these fuzzy feelings, 80s, 90s, the feel good 80s, like that's fine. And, it's nostalgic. It sort of reminds you of your youth. But, I think, once those fuzzy feelings wear off and you start to look at the film a bit more critically, the first book I wrote was 22 years ago, and it was a book about MuchMusic. It's called Much Master T, One VJ's Journey. And you're watching the film, and, Master T, he had worked in the building since the doors opened, literally in 1984. Mm-hmm. And then he began to, he went on to become this hugely popular VJ who not only provides this massive platform for Black music, but he also conducts many of these blockbuster interviews with some of the biggest icons of back then and today, Madonna, Janet Jackson, like it goes on and on. So when we talk about the film, there are good reflections on people like John Martin, MuchMusic's co-founder, who I think people don't know too much about. He hired me to be a VJ at another network when he left. But you're watching the film and you're like, Master T, there's no original interview with Master T, but there is with the other VJs. That's a big sort of a gaping hole, a big void, Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Master T, for me, Monica Diol, people like Michael Williams, they helped me see myself when I was watching, because there just wasn't a lot of there weren't a lot of people of color on television, especially in music television. How did their presence kind of help shape the station's identity?
Yeah, well, I would say that it was interesting because, as Craig stated earlier, none of the newer school VJs are in the film, as far as original interviews. And it was interesting because I was sitting at the screening next to and nearby a whack of former VJs that happened to be like racialized. You know what I mean? So, right. So Hannah Sung, she was a VJ there. She, Asian. Tracy Melchor, who hosted Rap City. And I didn't get to ask them after the screening whether they thought they'd be in there or how they felt, because they're not in there. But I would say, there's a lot of, real strong educational moments in the film. Monica Diol sort of becoming the first sort of South Asian, popular television personality in North America, not just Canada. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of good historical tidbits and factoids in there tied to racialized communities and their attachment and engagement with the music station. So I thought that was pretty good.
Craig, you sort of get this feeling watching the documentary that it was a real fly by the seat of your pants operation, that everyone was just kind of making it up as they went along. Does that track with your actual experience and memories of working at MuchMusic?
100%. Yeah. I mean, when I came in there, I came in as an intern in 85. And then, I was immediately working with the live VJs on the floor, starting at 99 Queen Street East. I started there. I was there until spring of 87 when we moved over to 299 Queen Street West. So, and it was live. It was basically, at that point, when we first launched, it was 6 hours of live video flow. And it was just a VJ throw, 3 videos, commercial, VJ throw, 3 videos, commercial. Mm-hmm. And so that was what was sort of what happened. I mean, and the VJs were responsible for what they were going to say. They got the playlist and they just went live. And so at that point, it was all music fans. It was people that loved the music, knew the music, what they were playing. And also at that point, the playlist was so broad. It was like metal. It was alternative. It was country. It was jazz. I mean, we played everything. And that's why when you see some of the interviews in the film, you realize, okay, Lou Reed and Patti Smith, you don't really necessarily think that those are people that you relate to MuchMusic. But the fact is, because of the birth of MuchMusic coming from the new music and City Limits, it just evolved that way. So we had everybody in. But the other thing that we had set out to do was to create a Canadian star system. And I think that's what really happened. I mean, we were supposed to play and had to play 30% content, but most of the time we played more. And it wasn't something we really worried about. But ultimately, we were playing lots of genres. And when we went live, we were live. And there was no delay. It was you got exactly what you saw.
And I think that's what people loved about it. It's definitely what I loved about it. You know, Liisa, we've sort of been talking about some of the eras, some of the key parts of MuchMusic's very long and varied history that we're missing. But it's hard to pack all that stuff in. But, you know, are there areas you really feel this documentary came up short?
You know, I feel that I agree with Dalton. It's a very fuzzy love letter to something that hundreds of thousands, millions of people in this country grew up with and care about. Does that make it a great documentary? I think that's a question. Where is Moses Znaimer in this film? I've worked in documentaries. I know that there are many, many reasons you may or may not have a certain person in the film, but like, I don't know. I felt like there was a big hole of his presence in the film, and not really showing the global impact of MuchMusic and how different it was. Like, Canada was the only country that didn't have MTV in the 80s and 90s. And it's because we had something better already. And what they did, the innovations they did at MuchMusic were copied by people around the world. I felt that the documentary didn't give as much credit for the innovation in broadcasting, in treating musicians, having smart conversations. You know, Dalton's talked about seeing, you know, yourself reflected on screen and the importance of that. Man, I loved being able to watch people have intelligent conversations with artists. You know, I grew up watching Entertainment Tonight, and this was like the opposite. You know, I felt the film didn't give that whole picture to me.
One more thing. Yeah. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Dalton.
Yeah, no. I wanted to sort of add on to that, Liisa. Yeah, it's just like, for one, you know, in all fairness, I guess it's next to near impossible for one film to capture, you know, because there was a lot of big gaps in the film for me. If you're into certain music forms, music genres, you know, like The Birth of Rhapsody, like that's a film unto itself. You know, the show was created by Michelle Geister. Like, she's not in there really. You just see sort of little shots here and there. And the show sort of hung on for dear life. And, you know, when you talk about, you know, Drake and The Weeknd are two of the top 5 artists on the planet. You know what I mean? And their success sort of stands on the shoulders of all those musicians that got played on MuchMusic that did rap and R&B and soul. And so there's a bit of an empty feeling for sure. But I'm hoping that there will be other MuchMusic films that can fill these gaps that I think Liisa and I are suggesting. You know?
Yeah, like Craig said, we need that 10-part series.
Movies in here.
Yeah.
Liisa, one really interesting thing that's sort of happening now that the film has been screened and released is this legal action that's being threatened because they're claiming the director didn't get permission to use Universal's music in the film. Now, the director is saying it's fair use, but you've worked, like you mentioned, on a number of these music-related documentaries. What does this tell you? What do you make of his argument here?
So I'll say I think there's a great misunderstanding about copyright rules amongst the general public, and even amongst some people working in art, and what the exceptions are. When I was watching the film, I was often thinking, how did this guy afford these songs? Because he just had banger after banger, and Britney Spears and No Doubt and many, many of these clips. And I thought, well, you know, he's kind of a maverick filmmaker. And maybe he mortgaged another house and paid for these songs because it was important to him. But then I read an interview with him where this issue came to light. He says the morning of his big screening, the Toronto premiere, he got a letter, a threatening letter about from Universal, which is one of Canada's big major labels, about, you know, music that he'd used in the film without clearing it. And I thought, I'm shocked and not shocked because when I watched the film, I thought, wow, there's a lot of copyrighted stuff in here. And I'm shocked because it's like, it's a bit amateur hour. Like the filmmaker says he consulted with an IP lawyer in the States. Well, I'm not a lawyer, but I did take a law course, a Harvard Law copyright course. And I think we learned on the first day the difference between Canadian and American copyright rules. So just not to get too nerdy, but you can have an exception for what's called review critical news reporting. Like if CBC or MuchMusic does a story about a musician who has died or just received an award, yeah, you can use their music. It's news reporting. When you make a feature documentary, it's not the same rule. And I think maybe he wanted to just ask for forgiveness instead of permission. But it's just one more thing that makes me feel that this is a fan letter and not a film. Right.
That's an interesting way of putting it. Craig, before we go very quickly, I just want to know from you, there's so much of this legacy to be proud of, but watching this film, what made you, really connect to your time there, and what makes you the most proud of the legacy you helped build at MuchMusic?
I just think that everything about it was that it was kind of unique. It was impactful in creating that live environment, and I just don't think we can ever have that again. People have talked about trying to reproduce MuchMusic, but it just can't be done. And just speaking to the movie itself, I mean, it's a great movie. There's something in it for everyone, but there's not everything for everyone that wants something. And I think that is just the nature of a 2-hour film instead of a 10-part series, which I think was the original pitch. Mm-hmm. So to be able to encapsulate some of the origins, and I know like Master T shouldn't have been excluded the way it was, but in terms of seeing where MuchMusic came from and the fact that it was, and I wish Michelle Geister had been referenced a little more, where Michael and Michelle sort of were the ones that formulated together, and specifically Michelle sort of leading the charge with Michael to create Rap City. I mean, Michael Williams brought Soul in the City from his Montreal radio days. So that kind of made sense that he brought that. But Rap City and that whole evolution is sort of captured, and it shows that some of the key artists, but then, it does. By the time you hit the 90s, when it really started exploding, you don't really see it. You see Maestro a lot. You don't really see too much of the Dream Warriors. You see Mishi Me, but there's a lot of that missing. And then the other parts of it, in terms of all genres of music, it does. It's just impossible to encapsulate it. So, I mean, I think it is. It's a love letter. I mean, to me, it's from Sean to what he grew up with, and tries to speak to the people that grew up loving MuchMusic. I grew up loving MuchMusic from within, and I still look back now. I mean, I was, like I said, I went into going to see this movie with a little bit of, upset about hearing from my friends Kim Clark Champness or Master T or Ed the Sock or whatever, who felt I should have been interviewed. And I get that, but I just think that it couldn't have become a film at all if with that much content. So it must have been very tough to whittle down that content. But for me, it left a lasting impression on me, because it did capture the time I was there and how great it was.
Okay, well, I really appreciate you all having this conversation with us. I'm excited about this 10-part series it sounds like you're all going to make together. Liisa Ladouceur is an author and journalist based in Toronto. Dalton Higgins is an author, journalist, and an instructor at Toronto Metropolitan University. And Craig F. Halket is a former on-air personality and program director at MuchMusic. The documentary 299 Queen Street West screens tonight at the Winspear Centre in Edmonton, moving on to Regina, Vancouver, Victoria, and Winnipeg later this month. Okay, let me take you back in time with this.
iPod, 1,000 songs in your pocket.
Okay, so that was the very first commercial for Apple's iPod. The year was 2001, and for millions of music lovers, it was a game changer. But sadly, the streaming generation brought the iPod's reign to an end years ago. But it was actually only last year that Apple officially discontinued the iPod for good. But now, Urban Outfitters is selling refurbished and retrofitted iPods for as much as $350 US. And that news has some old schoolers in their feelings, including Commotion regular Niko Stratis. Hi, Niko.
Hello, welcome. I'm glad to be an old schooler this morning.
You know what? We're actually the same age, so we're in this together. Okay, I loved reading your piece. It really took me back, and it had me in my feelings too. I want you to take us back to buying that first iPod. What did it feel like? How important was that device to sort of your evolution as a music lover?
I don't think I've ever felt like a wealthier person than I did when I was like, I will buy an iPod with money that I have, because they were expensive pieces of technology, you know, at the time. And I've been a lifelong music person. My dad had his stereo that he built, and it was like the center of our living room, you know. And so I sort of grew up buying every new piece of music technology as it came along. I had a mini disc player before I bought my iPod. And when I bought my iPod, it was like, okay, every album I can think of, all the music that I own can be with me forever. And it just felt like my whole world just opened up in a heartbeat, you know?
I love that. I mentioned you wrote a piece. It's really beautiful. Everyone should go and read it. And in it, you kind of recount the feeling you had recently visiting an Urban Outfitters with your niece. You wrote, "They are pining for a past they don't have, the idea of a life that's not even theirs." And this is about, you know, these sort of new Gen Z shoppers buying their iPods. Tell me a little bit more about what you're kind of getting at right in that piece.
I mean, there's a lot of this idea. The last time I was in Urban Outfitters, you know, we are both in our 40s. So like, I don't go to Urban Outfitters as often as I might have when I was younger. But, you know, you look around and there's analog phones, and there's all these pieces, this ephemera of an age that is just so far gone. And for me, it's like, this is the relics of my youth. You know, very few people have an analog phone in their house that's tethered to the wall, but you can still buy the Garfield version of an Urban Outfitters for $40. And there's all these things that I look around and it's like, right, they're selling nostalgia, but they're selling me nostalgia, and I don't shop here anymore. It's like, it's this interesting idea of like, who are we reselling what past to, which is a thing I find as every generation changes, is we sort of blur the lines as to who has, you know, what memory and what era they belong to.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really interesting idea of who they're selling this for. But I do notice that it seems to be a greater and greater desire for consumers, for young consumers, to have more of a tangible connection to their media, whether it's those sort of old school cameras, Polaroids, records are still very popular. What do you make of that idea that people do want this more physical connection to the art that they consume?
I mean, ultimately, I think that younger people, I do my best to not be cynical about youth. And sometimes I'm better at that than others. But I do think that, like, look, I have 3 nieces that are teenagers, and I do see them, like, you know, they have those Polaroid cameras, they have all these things, and they are interested in this. It's part of it is our job is like, how do we provide the context for what these things are? You know, like when we're selling kids record players, how are we giving them the context for what a record player is? You know, there's this phenomenon a couple of years ago where there was like YouTube videos of young kids, and they give them a Nintendo 64. And then the point of the video is to make fun of these kids that don't know what a Nintendo 64 is. I'm like, but of course they don't. If they didn't grow up with this, they don't get why this is important or special or whatever. So it's like, you know, I think a lot of older people like myself or older can do this thing very easily, where we sort of belittle or look down on younger people that engage in this technology that maybe don't have the same affinity for it. So part of it is like, how do we tell stories about it that gives it context, that make it so we understand why these things are special? And kids want to own things. You know, owning something is really an important part of your identity. And I think that's a harder thing now that, like, the idea of owning digital art is so ephemeral. Like, you just have a Spotify subscription, you don't own anything. So I think part of it is like, they want to own something that feels like it belongs to them, that says something about who they are.
Well, I love that. And I love in your piece that you had some advice for the newbies buying those iPods, because it's not easy to connect it to all your devices. So very quickly, Niko, if you're going to buy one of these things, how can you actually make it work for you?
You know, you're going to be doing a lot of Googling. You're going to join a lot of weird subreddits. But I feel like there are people, because iTunes doesn't exist anymore. And an iPod used to just sync with your iTunes library. So you do sort of have to search these workarounds, which is kind of the hidden beauty and magic of buying this repurposed technology, is then you have to sort of get into this world of like, okay, how do I make this work? How do I use this with a modern computer? You get to sort of like get into the guts of a world you maybe never thought you would be involved in. And it sort of teaches you also about like music ownership and digital rights. So, yeah.
Okay, well, Niko, thank you so much for stopping by. Niko Stratis is a culture writer at Spin and many other places. And that's it for the podcast today. Remember, you can listen to any episode of Commotion anytime, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Amil Niazi, sitting in for Elamin Abdelmahmoud. Thanks for listening.